to share, but I can't. All right. Anyway, here we are. Introductions. What are we going to learn? What are you going to talk about, Brendan? What we're going to learn, what I'm going to talk about is what programming is. What is programming? So programming is concerned with transforming input into output. Programming is taking what they call like data types, so which is like words or numbers or stuff like that, and putting it into making it do something or transforming it in some way that it's output. Input is the incoming stuff, output is what you turn it into. It involves logical analysis and decision making. So what does that mean? Decision making, that's like a regular phrase. You're making decisions, and then logical analysis, analyzing stuff based on how they fit in a given sequence of steps, right? Like trying to figure out, okay, I got to do this thing a lot. Maybe there's a way that I can make a decision about how I code this that's going to make it easy for me to do over and over and over again. It involves completing tasks at scale. Completing tasks, right? We know what that is. At scale, that's an industry term for making stuff, building stuff out in such a way that it can operate with a bunch of people trying to access the same stuff at the same time, or like a bunch of data running through it at the same time. It's a social activity. Like I said, like the best ways to code are to talk to people and to start a dialogue about problems or issues or solutions. So it's a very social activity. It's also a very creative process. You've got to create things, you've got to make decisions based on ideas and then create things off of those ideas. It's a very creative process. So what are we going to learn in this course? We're going to learn about three things: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Hey, what the heck are those? Let's start with HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it provides a developer a way to organize visual components of a page. A page, like this slide, has different stuff on it, right? You have that header, which is HTML. You have this image, HTML with the big 5. You have these bullet points with text on them, stands for hypertext and provides the developer. So all of those are stuff you can see on the page, stuff that's going to be on the page. And that's what HTML is. It's the content. It's the actual elements. It's the actual stuff that's going to be on the page. And it signals to the browser the intended behavior of each component. What that means is that like there's certain HTML things that say, hey, this is going to basically be some text. Or like we have this HTML5 thing over here. It's like, this is going to be an image. This is going to be a picture. And then you might have some other stuff later on where it's a div, which means it's kind of like a box or some sort of container. CSS, cascading style sheets. It provides a way to change the way a component looks to the user. We call it styling, the style of a page. Like this, this image, right, is blue, right? So as opposed to the orange one before, you can see up at the top stands for, and then in red, cascading style sheets. What CSS does is it gives you a way to change things like font color or font size or the positioning on a page of an element. And then JavaScript is going to provide the developer a way to make web components fully interactive for the user. It's going to make it's the stuff that happens when we click on buttons, right? I'm typing out a form to log into my stuff. I type in my name. I type in my password. I click log in, and JavaScript is what is going to say, great, I hear you, clicker. I'm going to take that and I'm going to log into your stuff. Static web pages can now function as fully featured applications. So like if you go to Spotify, you don't have to go to separate pages to get different songs. It's all right there for you, and you can play different songs based on what buttons you push on the page. It's really cool. So the way that they've kind of got this metaphored out is that there's a person, the HTML is the skeleton, it's the actual limbs and stuff, and then you've got CSS, which sort of fleshes out this person, makes this person look more like a thing as opposed to a skeleton. And then JavaScript's the brain. JavaScript's the thing that can make this guy walk around and talk and say stuff. That's their version. I got my own sort of version that I like to do. Let's see here. Let's go to Google Timer stopwatch. Yeah, all right. And everyone can still see this, right? Yell at me if you can't see it. All right, cool. So we have this stopwatch, right? Here's the stuff on the screen. We got a big, like a bunch of numbers up here, right? That's one element. That's one thing on the page. This is an element, right? We also have this like line here that when I start, I don't know, maybe it's like a divider. It divides this from these buttons, right? There's this element on the page. There's this.
We can't see what you're talking about.
Oh
Sorry.
no. Okay. All right. Hold on one second. Thank you for telling me. It won't be the dumbest thing I do during this class. Can you see this?
Yeah, that we can see.
Great. Awesome. Cool. All right. All right. Here we go. First I'm going to talk about what HTML is. HTML is the stuff on the page, right? And I mean, when I'm saying elements, I'm talking about components like pieces of the page. So this like seconds thing here, like this text, that's an element. Then you have this divider down here, this gray bar, that's an element. You have this start button. You have this reset button. And then you have this tiny little like full screen thing down here, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements, right? That's the HTML, the actual things that are on the page. Then you have CSS. The fact that this is the size that it is, the fact that it's black font, the fact that this bar down here is this specific shade of gray, the fact that the start button is blue and the reset button is blue, but then has like this blue border that picks up on it, right? All of that is CSS. It's defining how is this specifically going to look. You'll see some stuff when we go through the slides that like certain HTML elements have like default styling, right? Like somebody was like, hey, listen, we're going to use all these things a bunch. Let's just like, I don't know, give them specific styles in case you don't tell them exactly what to do. But that's really what we're talking about is how things look versus actual things on a page. And then you come in with JavaScript. And JavaScript's awesome. It's what allows me to click this button and it's going to keep like counting up these seconds and updating this element to like whatever the current second is. And it's also what's going to enable me to come in here and click reset. By the end of this class, this is basically what we're going to build. That's pretty cool, right? Okay, I will stop sharing. Any questions about any of that, about like what we're going to kind of get into? Okay, cool. I'm going to dive straight into HTML. We've got a ton of slides. Oh. We've got a ton of slides here for the HTML. It's going to be pretty dense at first, but just like bear down. All this stuff you can Google, so don't sweat it too much. This is visible to everyone, yes? Great. All right, cool. Intro to HTML. The bones, right? Okay. What we're going to learn, we're going to see how we're going to see how to see the results of your HTML code, how to put HTML and see it on a page. We're going to figure out the syntax for writing the building blocks of HTML, which are called elements. We're going to talk about basic elements, headers, paragraphs, lists, etc. And we're going to talk about adding additional information to elements, and those are called attributes. We're also going to talk about how to configure images, links, using these attributes. So here's some HTML, right? On the page, on the left, we've got like what our page is actually going to look like, right? We've got this how I learned to code. We've got this lorem ipsum dolor, like all that text there. Then we've got another element, step 1 HTML. We've got another element, lorem ipsum dolor, the second one. Then we've got these two people smiling at us. And then we've got this other element, this other image, which is this person talking and pointing to some slides like me. Then on the right, we've got what our HTML will look like. So this HTML on the right is going to be what on a web page would become this web page to the left. So a couple of things just to run roughshod over this is we've got this thing called an H1. That's a header tag 1 that usually that has like that default styling that I talked about. The default styling is like big and bold, like the top there. But as far as like its function, it's meant to be like a header, like a title of a page. Then we've got this paragraph element, the paragraph tag. A paragraph tag usually has some kind of like text to it, right? Like a paragraph, right? And it's kind of defining feature. Its default CSS is to be separated and to itself. So like if I put two paragraphs together, they would see, or you can see here that like there's a little bit of spacing between how I learned to code and that step 1 HTML. There's some space in between that paragraph, that lorem ipsum dolor amet, and the other elements. So a paragraph usually is something that is complete into itself and kind of has a little spacing, kind of has it's a separate specific idea from everything else. Then we have H2. H2 is another type of header, but it's a little smaller, right? There's H1, which is the biggest and the boldest. Then there's H2, which is sort of like a subheader, right? Then there's another paragraph tag down here, and see how it has a little bit of spacing all around. It takes up the full width of the page. Then we have image 1 and then image 2. And that SRC, we'll talk about those in a little bit, but that's an attribute. You can add more information to an HTML element with these things called attributes. So those are a few of the tags, the element types that we're going to be learning about. So like I said, we have paragraph H1, right? You can see that on the left is the HTML that we would be writing in, and then the right is how it's going to look on the page. And this is once again like an example of how I said these things have some default styling. Somebody a long time ago wrote up, like Google was like, hey, we should write some default CSS for these elements. So unless you like override that or specifically say you don't want it, this is how these things are going to appear. We have a paragraph tag, which is smaller than a header tag, right? And then we have this thing called an image with this source attribute, and that's going to show us like a picture or an image, right? Any questions on just the tags and a little bit of how they work on a page? Okay. Parent and child elements. So the way that HTML is structured is that there are parent elements that have children, that have things underneath them. So like this UL contains or is the parent of these LIs, right? So a UL has these three children, these three UIs. Just so you know, that's an unordered list, which means that instead of like an ordered list, which is like 1, 2, 3, 4, like 1, go to the store, 2, eat some breakfast, 3, read the newspaper. It's an unordered list. So like the Word document equivalent would be like bullet points or like dashes, right? So the parent container is the actual list. I'm going to make a list. Here it is. And then these are all of the LIs, the list items. These are all of the items inside my list, all of the bullet points. So if you think about it that way, like naturally the element, the actual list element contains or is the parent of list items. So we got the parent on the outside and then the children on the inside. All of the children, any children that are all inside the same parents are siblings. That's generally what they're referred to as. Okay. The way that we talk about this stuff, a lot of times it's referred to as a tree structure. A tree has a root, a tree then has branches, and those branches keep on branching out until finally they don't have any more branches, and those are referred to as leaves. So in this case, right, we've got a body. The body is like the outermost element there, right? It kind of contains everything else. Then we have H1, right? And H1 doesn't have any children. Then we have this unordered list of 1 and 2. And so the LI1 and LI2 are children of the unordered list, right? And those are, I guess, grandchildren of body. You see how that works out on the right there? We have body, which yields or contains unordered list, and then unordered list contains LI1, LI2. So a couple of things about like writing this stuff out, right? Like we're going to talk also in this class about like how to write good code, right? How to write code that other people who are going to be working on this project with you can read. And if you look at the left and you look at the right and you're thinking about these parent to children relationships, the one on the left is kind of confusing, right? At a first glance, I can't really tell what's inside of or what contains what. The one on the right, because we're indenting to sort of represent or show those, it's immediately clear that that H3, the paragraph tag, and the other paragraph tag are all children of that div. Immediately I can tell. So that's the type of code that we want to start writing. Code that it gets as close to first glance recognition and understanding as we can. Any questions about any of that? Parent and child relationships.
Somebody had asked what the bracket div stands for.
Oh, div. So div is originally, it was like set up as a divider, right? Remember the, I think I took down that timer. Let's stop share. And let's share again. Timer. Come on. Stopwatch. Right. This thing down here, you see this bar? Right? Like right here. It's too hard to see. Let's bring it up. This guy. That's a div. It divides between this and this. That was originally the intent of it, is like to provide these like horizontal bars. But then what people sort of found was that you can make the width on these any size, and you can make the height on these any size. So you can turn them into these boxes. So quickly they became, instead of like dividers, they became these, dang it. Let's get out of this. So sorry, guys. Let me just do this and then pull up and get out of this. Yeah. They became things like this. Like this is a container. This is like a box, right, that contains all of this stuff. And then you have another one down here. And you kind of have two right here, right? You have like a box that contains this timer element and a box that contains this stopwatch element. So there was a transition in these things being like just dividers, just horizontal lines, to holding things and styling them, and also separating them into like boxes on a page, or big chunks of a page. Does that make sense? A little bit?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, cool. Sweet. Okay, but let's go back to the slides. Where were we? Okay, so that's the div. Anything else? Okay, so now we're going to talk about block and inline elements. So the paragraph tag, I don't know if you guys remember this before, but I said that a paragraph, one of the default things that it does is it takes up the entire width of a page, right? This blue bar is not contained to, or is not limited to, just the space of the hello. It takes up the entire width of the page. That's a block element. A block element basically says like, hey, only this element can be on this line of the page. If you're thinking about it like a Word document where like you might have a whole line of text, if I put this paragraph tag down there that says just hello, it would be like hello, and then the rest of that line would be empty. You can't put any other elements. You can't put any other text or anything on that line. Only this element can be on it. Conversely, you have inline elements. So these span elements are one of the default things that they have, is that they can be put in line. So I have two elements here. I have hello and I have goodbye. And hello and goodbye are on the same line. I can keep putting these guys on the same line, and they'll go for as long as the page is wide. So here I have a mix. I have a total of 5 elements, right? The first two, H1 and H3, are block elements. They take up the full width of the page, and they say, no other elements can sit on the same line as me. Then we have 3 span elements. We have pugs, Frenchies, and corgis, and each one of those sits on the same line and flows right to the end of the page. So that's block elements and inline elements. Any questions on those? Okay, moving on. Attributes. So attributes are bits of information that we can store on an element to give us, to key off of, or to identify the element, or to specify some like something it needs, like something that needs to function. So the most basic versions of these attributes are these things called ID and class. ID is a specific identifier. It says, hey, there's only one element out there that has this ID of specific, right? So anytime if I'm trying to find elements, if I'm trying to like select them, and I want to find that one that's super specific, I could just put an ID on it and then say, okay, go and find the element that has an ID of super specific. Classes, on the other hand, you can put multiple classes, right? You can put them on multiple elements. So it's kind of like a category or a genre, right? Like multiple elements can have this class. And then when I want to pull several elements with a common value, I can put this class on there and I can say, hey, all of these hello worlds, put all of us on there. And then later on, when I want those paragraph elements, I can just say, okay, find all the elements with all of us, and then it'll give me back all of these. So you have ID, which is a single, selecting a single element, and then you have class, which selects a specific group of elements. Links and images need attributes in order to work. Links, like when you click on something that says visit Google and it takes you to Google, it has this thing called href. Href is basically the URL or the address that it's going to take you to when you click on that link. So if I click on visit Google, it'll say, okay, what is the address? What is the place that you're going to send it? And you would put in https://google.com and it'll take you there. And then images pull an image from a place. As opposed to taking you somewhere, it pulls an asset or an image from an address. So what you do is you put in this attribute called src, source. Where is the source for this image? And then you put in a specific URL, and it will go out and make a request, fetch that image, and then render it on the page. So here we have my image.jpg, and it shows this lovely pug. So those are some attributes we have. Once again, anchor, or rather link with href, image with source, we have ID, and we have class. Any questions on any of those? Okay, cool. So here's some HTML quirks. The first one is that white space doesn't matter. Like the way that you write your HTML in terms of like space between words, it doesn't really affect the way that it gets rendered. You're just writing what the content should be. And a lot of times when the web page is getting this stuff, it's parsing through and it doesn't really care about white space. It just like goes until it sees specific characters. So like on these, it's basically just saying, okay, you want a hello, a space, and then a world. That's what you want. Okay, cool. There are specific HTML elements that will take into account spacing, but we're not going to cover those in this course. So, but if you're interested, like pre-formatted, the element tag PRE is that, handles that. Okay, gotcha number one, right? Here's another example, right? We have hello, hello on the same line versus hello, hello on two different lines. It doesn't matter. It renders them exactly the same. Remember that we said that a paragraph tag is a block element, which means it takes up the whole width of the page. So in both of these, it's saying, okay, I got what you want. You want something that'll take up the full width of the page and it'll say hello. Gotcha. So it doesn't really matter how you write it. And then the last thing is that HTML is a little too forgiving sometimes. Like I said, like it will say, all right, I know what you want. I gotcha. And sometimes it doesn't have you. Sometimes it's a little wrong. So the best thing to do is always use a web page to look at what your HTML is actually rendering. Last thing here is comments. So like I said, we're writing code that other developers are going to come in and be able to read. Comments are like ways that you can write notes to somebody to fill them in about what's going on in the code in like plain, like plain English, so that they can come in and just read the document and understand as quickly and effectively as we possibly can. So the way that we write a comment in HTML is we do this caret exclamation point dash dash. We do that on the opening of the comment, and then when we want to close it, we do dash dash other way caret, and that'll close off the comment. And you can do multi-line comments by adding spaces and doing other lines until you close off that comment. It'll keep commenting things out. And this won't appear on the page. The only thing here, right, that appears on the page is hello and world. All this commented stuff gets removed from the actual, what the web page renders. Common HTML mistakes: forgetting to close tags or quotes, right? Like we've seen in all cases where when we want a paragraph tag, we have this P with the carets, then we have hello, and we need another closing tag, another P with that slash in front of it. We need that to close the paragraph. Otherwise, the page doesn't know what to do. It gets all confused. So forgetting to close tags or quotes, misspellings, failing to indent properly can cause a lot of mistakes. And that's it.